This car, it's like Scrappy-Doo, isn't it? It's small, but it thinks it's feisty. Let me at 'em! Let me at 'em! Hello guys, welcome back to Car Obsession and welcome to another episode of Cheap Thrills. If you're new to this series, let me explain. I highlight and celebrate fun cars you can buy for under £5,000. So far I've covered mostly hot hatches. The car in today's video, well, it's a little bit different. That's because it is this, a Fiat Seicento Sporting, a small car with a big character. But you know what, this isn't just any Fiat Seicento Sporting. This is my Fiat Seicento Sporting. Yes, that's right, I bought this with my own money. Stop laughing.
Esta la situación, esta la situación. Buscando where I belong, been buscando where I be. Esta la situación, esta la situación. Buscando where I belong, been buscando where I be. Vamos.
As you would expect from a car with such a small stature, the engine is equally pint-sized. There was a choice of two for the Seicento. You had the 900cc Fiat 100 series engine, or in the case of the Sporting, you had a 1.1 litre 8-valve fire engine. No, not that kind of fire engine. It's called fire because it stands for fully integrated roboticized engine. What that basically means is that this engine was assembled by robots, and in fact, Fiat had this in their roster for a very long time. This engine was in production for around 35 years and was retired in 2020. So Fiat obviously had a lot of faith in it. If you go for the 900cc engine, you get 39 horsepower. Yeah, that's not even enough to rip the skin off a rice pudding. Now, as you would expect, if you go for the 1.1 litre, you get an improved 54 horsepower. Now, before you scoff too much and wonder why I'm even bothering my time to include this in the Cheap Thrill series, let me explain a bit more. Look up thrill in the Oxford Dictionary and it will tell you it is a strong feeling of excitement or pleasure. And whilst us petrolheads would normally link excitement and pleasure to speed, that isn't always the case. You don't need a fast car to have fun. The Mazda MX-5 is a great example of that. No, sometimes it's more about how the car drives, how it makes you feel, and the memories you make in it. What the Fiat Seicento lacks for in speed, this version takes about 13 seconds to hit 62 miles per hour. It makes up for with character and charm. Now, speaking of 0 to 62 times, if you go for the 900cc engine, that will take a much more leisurely 17 seconds or so to hit the same speed. Yeah, so if you have the 900cc version, have a bit of patience and make sure you plan your journeys in advance because you're going to be late to a lot of meetings and appointments. As well as offering 54 horsepower, this engine develops a tarmac shredding 88 Newton meters of torque. I think I've probably got more than 88 Newton meters of torque. Yeah, so a fast car, this is not. But having said that, does it feel like a slow car? No, it's actually quite peppy. The 1.1 engine is fizzy, it's zesty. It's mated to a 5-speed manual gearbox. You could actually have this with an automatic gearbox. Well, I think it's more of an automatic manual, if that makes sense. It's the Citymatic, if I'm not mistaken. But that's that's a very rare option to come across. The 5-speed gearbox, the changes are quite long. They can be a little bit vague, but for the most part, you can work your way through the gearbox quite quickly. Which is just as well because this will become your friend as you will need to be working through the gears, the ratios in order to keep on top of what little power the Fiat Seicento has. This car, in case you're really interested, revs to about 7,000 RPM and by that point the valves are screaming at you, they're begging you to change gear. But little Italian cars, that's how they're meant to be driven, isn't it? You thrash the life out of them and they'll thank you for it, I think. So in case you don't know, Seicento is Italian for 600. And this car was the successor to the Cinquecento, which is 500 in Italian. Now, the Cinquecento was pretty much made famous by hit comedy series in the UK, The In-Betweeners, one of my favourites. This was produced between 1998 and 2004, and to be truthful, this is pretty much the same car as the Cinquecento. There isn't really much different. Mechanically, underneath the bonnet and underneath the body, they are pretty much the same car, which is handy because you can't buy a Haynes manual for this, but you can buy a Haynes manual for the Cinquecento, which I have at home as it so happens. So after this car was taken off sale in the UK, it was replaced by the Fiat 500, a car that is of course still being made today, albeit fully electric. So Fiat has kind of come full circle. Speaking of going full circle, this car feels somewhat nostalgic for me, because my very first car was also an X-Reg Fiat, albeit a Punto, which was a 1.2. Yeah, my very first car was an old, battered X-Reg Fiat Punto. So this, for me, feels kind of familiar. It feels like I've come home. Although my Punto did have a little bit more power, albeit not much. The number plate was actually quite similar. That was X-Ray 812 Foxtrot Hotel Tango. I still remember the number plate, and I actually drove the Punto on my wedding day. It was kind of my wedding car, which makes my wedding sound tragic, but believe me, it wasn't. So this is X612 Bravo Echo Lima, and because this car is Italian and the last bit of the number plate is BEL, I have named this car Bella. So ladies and gentlemen, say hello to Bella, my Fiat Seicento Sporting. Go on, Bella. Ciao, Bella. Apologies for the accent. Now, let's be honest, this is not a fast car, but once you wind it up, once you build momentum, you can still kind of hustle it down a B road. The cornering is quite roly-poly. In fact, I'm surprised the door mirrors haven't got scuffs on them from where the car's been leaning too much and it's been hitting the road. Now, for what it's worth, the sporting version of the Seicento, of course, having a sportier look in these front sport seats, which have faded with time, the suspension compared to the standard Seicento was dropped by 20mm. So, although you don't really get much more power, Fiat did kind of try to make this a bit more sporty. The steering is very light, which is great for driving around town, but on roads like this, granted this car wasn't really designed for this kind of driving, yeah, the steering is a bit vague. Oh my god, this car's so roly-poly, it's really entertaining. When you, I don't know if it's just a trait of the Seicento or just my particular one, but when you accelerate too hard or if any kind of weight transfer, the petrol gauge just keeps moving, and even I've got about half a tank. Just then when I was doing that roly-polying, where the fuel was moving, I had the fuel warning light come on. I mean, character, that's what this car has. So this particular car has done almost 82,000 miles, and I paid £750 for it. Some of you may think, you paid £750 for that? But to be fair, that's kind of the going price for these. Well, that's a very brave overtake by that Audi. Jesus almighty. Oh my god, he's done it again. Now, I don't think any of my cameras would have captured just what unfolded in front of me, but those were two very ballsy and quite stupid overtakes on a corner. Believe it or not, I've actually got the wind it back up. I've actually got the original invoice for this car. This car came with a stack of paperwork, and believe it or not, I have the original sales invoice for this car. The lady who owned it for several years, in fact, this is quite a low ownership car. I think she paid a little under £8,000. So it'd be interesting. So that was back in September 2000. It'd be interesting to see what that equates to now with inflation. I'll pop a little caption, a little subtitle on the screen, because I'm quite curious actually. As it so happens, this car was registered on the 22nd of September. That's the same date as my wedding anniversary. It was meant to be. This car was meant to be in my possession. What a strange coincidence. Another reason why I think this car is eligible to be classed as a cheap thrill is because this is cheap enough to be someone's first car. And what's more thrilling in your motoring life than your first ever car? Buying your first car is like, I don't mean to be crude, but it's like losing your virginity. You can only do it once, and okay, for some people it might not always be the best, but you're always going to remember it, aren't you? That's what I'm trying to get at. This car is cheap to buy, it's easy to park because it's so small, cheap to insure, cheap to run, it's economical. Okay, it isn't the safest, but I'll get onto that a little bit later. So for a first-time driver, this car, dare I say, is ideal. It's just so cheap. Parts for this car are really easy to pick up, and if you want to go down the route of modifying your Seicento, again, that won't break the bank. For example, an aftermarket catback exhaust for this is about £170. If you want to get coilovers, you can get those for under £300. Conversely, you can spend more money than that if you really want to. But my point is, if you do want to go down the modification route for this car, you can do so, and it will be a cost-effective way of doing it. It's worth noting though that if you're looking to chase power, as you can probably guess, this isn't the car for you. So it has been known for people to swap this engine with the 1.2 from the Fiat Punto, actually probably the same 1.2 that was fitted to my Fiat Punto, although that car is long dead. And that gives you more horsepower, but even then, it's not going to be a massive hike. So yeah, if you're looking to get one of these to get lots of power out of them, I'm not going to say it's not possible, but it's probably going to be quite a lengthy task to do and quite expensive, to the point you may as well just get pheasants! Ah! Why are pheasants so stupid? Anyway, as I was saying, so you may want to just consider getting something else to begin with, something that's going to be easier to get power from, i.e. something with a turbo. But I can imagine that once I've put an exhaust on this, yes, I will be doing that. And I probably will get coilovers as well. Nice little rev match. You've probably got quite a fun little car on your hands. I do want to do a few road trips in this car. And maybe, just maybe, take it to the Nürburgring. By the way, guys, if you have any ideas of what you'd like to see with Bella, let me know in the comment section. But just bear in mind, my budget at the moment is very limited. I have spent a fair amount of money on Monique, my MX-5 recently. Therefore, yeah, I'm not exactly swimming in cash. Right, okay, on to the handling. Come on, Bella, let's see what you can do. Right, drop it down into fourth. Actually, drop it down into third. The brakes aren't too bad, actually, considering the age of the car. Back stepped out a little bit there. Yep, it's quite roly-poly in the corners. The plus side, though, even though this has a short wheelbase, which can be bad news for ride comfort, because the suspension on this is quite supple, it does soak up the bumps better than you may expect. fifth. The pedal layout is quite interesting. The clutch pedal and the brake pedal are quite close to each other. So even wearing, well, I'm size 11, even wearing standard size trainers, I do find that when I'm operating the clutch and the brake at the same time, I'm kind of stepping on my own feet. And then you've got the accelerator pedal, which is kind of offset. It's out quite far to the right hand side away from the other two pedals. It's a bit quirky, quite Italian.
It's clear that this is not a fast car, but thanks to some rather clever marketing, the Seicento was lucky enough to bear the name of a certain German racing driver called Michael Schumacher. 5,000 special editions were made to celebrate Schumacher's success in Formula 1, but sadly, no Ferrari engine was slipped under the bonnet. In fact, Fiat did absolutely nothing when it came to their engine department. What the Turin-based company did though was to fit the Abarth styling kit, a new chrome surround for the bottom of the gear lever, as well as a limited edition plate and number on the passenger door, and of course signatures on the boot lid and the side skirts. It's also worth noting that ABS came as standard on these cars, whereas on the Sporting it was an optional extra that my particular Sporting doesn't have. So if this car is good enough for Michael Schumacher, then it's good enough for me. Compared to the standard car, the Sporting version featured an anti-roll bar, sport seats, 20mm drop in ride height and 13-inch alloys. Yes, they really did make alloys that small back then. However, if you went for the Abarth version, the alloys were upgraded to 14 inches. Oh, what a time to be alive!
As you can see, at a height of 6'2", I don't really fit in this car very well. My hairline is very close to becoming one with the roof lining. I do have a sunroof, as you can probably see, which doesn't open. As you may have seen in the B-roll, it is taped shut because it was leaking. I can tell there's been some evidence of leaking in here, as there's some light mould spots in and around the cabin, but that's just part of the character. It's an optional extra. This car, it's like Scrappy-Doo, isn't it? It's small, but it thinks it's feisty. Let me at 'em! Let me at 'em! Oh, bump. Oh. Now, speaking of optional extras, I do have an airbag, which is good, although, yeah, this car, it scored 1.5 in the Euro NCAP testing. But on the plus side, it was better than the Rover 100, so swings and roundabouts. As an option, you could have this with ABS, which this car doesn't have. But to be fair, it's got so little power that I think you'd have to do quite well to lock up the front wheels. And one thing I haven't mentioned is the weight of this car, or should I say lack of weight. Now, let's put things into perspective. A Mark 1 MX-5 is about 1,000 kilos, give or take. This car, however, have a guess at how much you think it weighs. If you said 735 kilograms, then pat yourself on the back, because that's exactly what this car weighs. And you can certainly feel the lack of weight. Right, the sun is starting to set, and I think it's about time I finish this video. Make sure the handbrake is pulled up tight, because the handbrake on this is as useful as a chocolate teapot, so that's one thing that will need addressing. So guys, I really do hope you've enjoyed that video. If so, be sure to like, comment and subscribe. If you are subscribed, don't forget to click the bell icon so you get notified every time I make a video. But until the next time guys, be sure to keep up the car obsession.